Hello, today's video is called Internal Chaos Aided to Invoke the Act. Today is October 21st, 2022, and it was day 7 of the public inquiry to the federal government invoking the Emergency Act on February 2022. The agenda for today is background, key details, witnesses, and my point of view. As everybody knows, we are reviewing the daily witnesses in terms of the inquiry that is taking place in the city of Ottawa to understand the reasons why Justin Castro invoked the Emergency Act on February 14, 2022 against the protests that were happening in Ottawa, and also the powers that he used to understand if he misused them in the context of this act. My videos are available at YouTube, Lisa Prus Research, as well as my own website, lisaprusresearch.com. Here is the link that will allow you to watch live all this inquiry every single day until the end of November. I would like to show you some key details that I found today. During the testimonies, we hear a lot of short forms, so I wanted to do a little bit of a recap. OPP is Ontario Provincial Police. You have the OPS, Ottawa Police Service, RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, PLT, very important because we're going to see played a very important role within the context of the negotiations with the truckers, police liaison teams, and also to complicate a little bit the interaction on the ground, there's a Parliament Protection Services. I don't know if there's maybe a better image on the internet, but that's the best I could find. And you can clearly see that in the pant there is a line that is blue, that is red, that is yellow, that will indicate those are the different associations and institutions. And here for the PLTs, you can see they wear vests to identify themselves. Now you can see here how on February 13, when I actually went to Ottawa, the temperature was minus 22. So you can see, even here you can see the line, but obviously everybody was with a lot of layers to try to protect themselves with the wind and also temperature. I went at noon and it was minus 22. I can't even describe how cold it was. So obviously you can see here, this is one of the most painful images perhaps of the whole situation. You really don't even have the ability to look at the seals to see who is who. Some images on honor of those who suffered any losses, either personal, financial, or in any context, because the protest was very important in the history of this country. I stood behind them and I still stand behind them. That's why I do these videos. I don't care if you are injected or not. I think that what the whole convoy was about, and we all thank the truckers so much, is about freedom, is about the ability for bodily autonomy and also to be able to speak freely about whatever we want to speak. So thank you very much to everyone who stood for our rights. Here, perhaps one of the most difficult images to show, because you have all these operations, these horses that are actually they're trained to stomp on people. So that's pretty sad, because behind you can see the image that it says freedom for our kids. So I wanted to do also a little bit of a chart that indicates what is the ranking of all these people that we're listening to, because up to this point, we have been hearing about politicians and mayor and all these councillors, etc. But here now we're starting to look into the background of the police. That it's the most interesting part to me personally, and try to understand what is the role that everybody plays. So yesterday we heard about Patricia Ferguson, that she works for the OPS. She's a deputy commissioner. Today we're going to hear from a gentleman, Pardy, who is, was, because now he's retired, a chief superintendent of OPP. We have today the second part of Patrick Abrams, who's also with the OPP as superintendent. And on day 5, we had also this gentleman, Morris, who's a superintendent from OPP. So you can see how there are a lot of layers, and this actually helped me to better understand the different roles in the context of this situation. Now, I put together a summary because I want to understand exactly what are the parts where everybody agrees and what are the parts that I'm actually seeing could have led to the conclusion that we unfortunately reached as a nation. So what everybody is agreement in throughout all the testimonies is that this was an unprecedented situation, not only because of the pandemic. So you come from a lot of people who are not present, people who may be sick, who may be away, whatever the case might be. Because of the size, you had people coming from the west, from the east, people from Quebec coming from the city, etc. So also the fact that there was a GoFundMe that was fueling the whole situation. Most importantly, you had people from all backgrounds. You had kids, you had ex-police officers, you had ex-military, you had a lot of people. So it was not a normal protest from that context, not only adults that have a cause. So you had a lot of parties interested in freedom, and they became, in all the videos that I heard personally, the kids were enamored of the truckers, and there was very beautiful moment to unite us all in the highways, all the images we have seen. So it was very complex from that perspective and also unprecedented. And the second thing that everybody agrees is that the OPS, and that's again the Ottawa Police Service, couldn't solve it on its own. And it's obvious. You can see from the images how many people they were, and they have less than, I think, 1,500 officers, and you can't just get them out of all the city and put them in just one place. So I totally understand that part. However, the chief of police, now I understand more and more why he ended up resigning, because you can see here a list of just what I see, and I'm sure that we're going to uncover more things, but up to this point, I see that he failed to incorporate all the intelligence that was telling him from day one that this convoy was going to stay long term. It was not a couple of days. The second thing is that he allowed the trucks into the core of downtown, which obviously was positive for the objective of the convoy, but it was detrimental for the development of the things, because created this volatile situation for everyone involved that end up in those horrible images of those horses, etc. The strained relationships that he had within the scope of his internal team, and when new elements were coming into the picture to help with the situation, also he was unable to develop a cohesive force that was being motivated. Quite the contrary, the morale, we're going to see it in a minute, was very low internally, and also the new people were unable to operate cohesively. They were all feeling they were in silos. Another thing that I noticed is that everybody seems to point out the fact that he failed to see that this was a big picture situation within the nation. He was always very concerned with managing Ottawa, which makes sense because obviously that's his responsibility. But at the same time, he needed to understand that, let's say, in the situation, not only Coutts, but most importantly in Windsor, because it's also in Ontario, when they had the situation, the Ambassador Bridge between the 13 that ended up being finished the blockade on the 13th, all the resources had to be either shifted or focused in different manners. So he was always unable to incorporate that element within the scope of what he had to plan to do. The other part is that the plans that he was coming with and he wanted to reinforce were against the best practices according to many other people. So he wanted to operate at night. So I read a plan today, I saw or heard about a plan today to go at midnight and 4 a.m. So obviously it's less than ideal, not only because of how cold it is, but also how dangerous it is to operate in the middle of the night. Also, another plan that he came up was going to clear block by block, which obviously requires a lot of people he didn't have. So again, he was unable to create a good, strong plan, either with additional resources or without that. Eventually, he developed what the base of the plan would be that worked, but in the beginning, that's what was happening. And most importantly, I think that he really never integrated all the incoming parties, and he broke trust with a lot of people, so that didn't work. So between that situation that was unprecedented and others wanted to help, and then when the resources that arrived couldn't commit because of his position and his inability to really embrace them into the context of the solution. And then on top of that, he sent Patricia Ferguson, the Strategic Deputy Commissioner, on vacation between February 11, that was Friday, and February 12, that was Saturday, and then she was back only 36 hours prior of the act being invoked. And we saw yesterday how when she returned, she didn't even understand what was the plan. She was at midnight sending emails saying, oh, there are two plans. So obviously the whole thing is important because it shows that this chaos contributed to invoking the Emergency Act. This is a very important thing. And big picture, you're going to see how today I'm going to go faster through the witnesses because every single person is going to say something that is related to the summary. So let's start with the witnesses. Today we started at 9:30, we finished at 5:10. We had the second part of the testimony from Craig Abrams, that started yesterday. I found fascinating that the lead commissioner didn't remind him that he was still under oath. That's actually very normal in a court of law, but again, this is just an inquiry. Ottawa had an impact in Canada. I spoke about that. The importance of the PLT. So I also mentioned that, and I think that there was a position from Slowly, not necessarily to diminish the importance, but not elevating the element and putting it within the plan. It's almost like he should have done a plan of, okay, by February X, PLT has to accomplish that. If something like that is not accomplished, day 2, such and such enters and that. There's not even the minor type of usage of the PLT that could have been very, very fundamental for the good and positive resolution of this situation based on the testimony not only of this witness, but the next one. The recommendation of closing downtown, we already heard about that. There were only 2 pieces of heavy equipment. I found that important because obviously the accusation is that there were more. And again, the long-term stay of the convoy, the Slowly attitude. Again, we spoke about these. Slowly wanted unreasonable things. So the summary of this part, when the Ottawa police was doing the cross-examination, was that the lack of communication created this chaos. Now, then there was convoy protester. I noticed that there is a tendency, and I don't really know why, because you know my position. I support the convoy, but their counselors are actually not well prepared. They asked today, this lady that she represents the convoy, she asked questions that the witness was saying, no, that's not true, that's not what I said, that's wrong, etc. She had wrong definitions, asked questions that he couldn't answer. So I was surprised about, again, just like yesterday, the counselor unprepared, and in the end, we're going to see another unprepared situation with the counselor from the convoy. So they talked about snatch and grab, and actually Craig said, no, I never said that. So the summary is that they are unprepared, again, second day in a row, but Abrams reiterated that the bad communication was actually detrimental to the creation of a proper plan. Then we had the government of Canada, and then they were talking about the action to arrest the Coventry that broke trust with the PLT, between the PLT and the protesters, because obviously when they felt betrayed at the end of the action, when they were supposed to be moving the gas and moving from that location, and then they said, actually, they end up being arrested. So obviously broke trust not only between the PLT, the police, and the protesters, but most importantly between the PLT and the rest of the operation from the OPS perspective. So the intelligence was also not useful at the end of the day because they couldn't meet the demands of the protesters. So the role of the PLTs, they were highly demotivated because they didn't understand their scope of the role. They didn't have any authority. So at the end of the day, why am I negotiating? That was a little bit of the feeling at the time. He stated that the convoy could have been stopped without the emergency act. So for my perspective, that's very important. Also, there was a part on which the government of Canada counselor asked about some serious body injury caused to officers, and then actually it backfired because Abrams said, no, that's not the case. And even the government of Canada counselor ended up stuttering because he felt really bad for what he was saying because it was not true. Very important, ratified the internal lack of communication, the approach of Slowly was not conciliatory, etc. So you can see here is more of the same from the summary at the beginning of the video. Then we had Slowly counselor, very interesting, because up to this point, I have never seen a counselor losing his temper, losing his composure. And then this gentleman, the Slowly counselor, started to literally raise the tone of his voice. At the beginning of the conversation, they were just doing a little bit of a recap of when did he arrive and at what point in time did the OPS ask for help. So it was totally normal, almost building just a timeline. But then they started to get into that conversation from yesterday on which Abrams said that Slowly, after the end of the conference call, said, oh, if I need 100 people, I will ask for 200. But he failed, and I'm talking about Abrams, he failed to put it in writing anywhere. So then Slowly counselor was accusing him of either not being truthful, or simply saying it without any support, because that never happened. So very aggressive tone. Even 2 or 3 times, the lead counselor had to say, listen, you have to respect the witness, so you have to let him answer. So very interesting, and I don't really understand why he became so aggressive, because it actually came across as very poorly managed from Slowly's counselor perspective. In the end, they're trying to place responsibility on Abrams for providing wrong numbers to Slowly plan, and numbers that Slowly came up with in the end were the ones that ultimately worked. So when the 1800 number came, Abrams said, well, this is coming from thin air. They even used the expression, and I wrote it down here. It was a number pulling out of a hat, like a rabbit. So very interesting, very aggressive against him. And what I loved about Craig Abrams, and he was completely calm. Like the aggression that happened was pretty high. He was completely calm. Very interesting. Then it was the City of Ottawa counselor. They confirmed the lack of communication. And then here, she obviously was trying to amp the situation, saying that the nurses couldn't go to a hospital, etc. Because of course that's her role, right? She's representing all the businesses and the people from Ottawa. And interesting, he acknowledged he didn't know of certain negotiations happening between the OPS and the protesters. So again, it just confirms the lack of a cohesive plan and an integration, a proper integration of the new resources that were coming to the city. So here we talk about the Ottawa Coalition, residents and businesses. So they just discussed that 15,000 people were in downtown, and there was a danger of the gas and the propane, both for police and residents. So obviously, Abrams said that's the case. And then they were talking about the fact that in the 417, that is the highway, you can see it here, that communicates and gets you into Ottawa. Here's downtown, here's Parliament Hill, here's Rideau Center that we have talked so many times, and over here is Coventry, that is Coventry Road, when they confiscated the gas and also they arrested the people. So it's east of downtown. I never went to this area, so I don't know how far away it is, but here's the 417, and saying that instead of helping to remove the trucks, they were actually signs on the highway saying trucks this way, as if almost helping. So it was a little bit of an accusation towards Abrams. Instead of moving the trucks away, they were bringing them in. I don't think that's bad. You have to help. That was his job, moving the trucks inside. But again, they were focusing on the impact on the residents, because that's the role of that counselor. Here you have now the second witness, Carson Pardee. He retired, OPP chief superintendent. So we saw also up there, just in a very close and positive relationship with Patricia Ferguson. He spoke very highly about her. So apparently they were getting along, even though, again, they're coming all together to work in a very stressful situation. And then he's talking about, he felt there was no intelligence being used, no plan was known, mixed messages, anyway, everything that we just spoke about. And finally, when the final plan from Bernier, that was the new person that came in the center. Remember, we spoke about this when Patricia went on this 2-day vacation. She came back, and then Bernier, that was the center, and the person who was going to deploy the plan was already in place without her even knowing, and she was the boss of this new man. So Bernier came in, and the plan was approved less than 24 hours before the deployment of the Emergency Act. Some important things here, decentralization slowly. I found this very interesting. We have to wait for him on this and wait for him on that. So obviously it became a bottleneck of situation, not ideal. You have to empower your people. That's basic in business. So imagine, I'm imagining here it's even more important to empower the police to do their job, the PLTs to do their jobs, to negotiate with the protesters and come to a positive resolution. But when you have chaos, obviously you're going to create a lot of internal and external confusion and may lead to violence, which ultimately was creating, in my opinion, as I said in the beginning, the whole negative result. The police could have closed the convoy without the Emergency Act. So once again, in the commission counselor. He's ratifying that. Then slowly counselor, he was not aggressive with him. So again, I don't know. I don't know what was with him and the previous witness. I really don't understand. There was a little bit of exposure to some internal communications, which obviously allows us to see the internal notes, and there were notes regarding the OPS. The Ottawa police was, quote, on its knees, and it's here in one of these images. They are exhausted. Police officers were walking out of meetings. They were burnt out, and they were saying, I can't do this anymore. And you can understand. Again, put yourself in their shoes. I'm 99.9% sure that they were among these police officers, some people who were not even able to feel aligned with their actions. You are receiving a pay to go and beat up protesters or make a line that potentially could be violent against protesters, and you may even believe that they have the right of do it or maybe align with them. On top of that, minus 20 something degrees wind, I was never able to stand up in one place. If I was not walking, I was just going to freeze. I could not stay more than maybe an hour and a half. So I can't imagine these gentlemen in this level of snow for 13 hours. I just don't even understand how they can do it. You can see here the amount of snow. And here they're arresting one truck driver. Like, what if I am aligned with that gentleman? What if I, by chance, I did shook the hand of many of these gentlemen? What if I'm talking about them, I just saw him yesterday and he was lovely, and then we just exchanged a coffee or whatever. Like, then I have to act against my own principles. So I'm sure that this was very difficult for all of them. You can see the amount of snow. Very tough situation for everyone. Here, the objective of the whole operation was to restore the Ottawa Police Service credibility, and then the OPS, again, the Ottawa, were not supportive of the PLT. And interesting question, this lady from the Ottawa Police asked him, do you really believe that nobody can challenge anyone? Because we're talking about the fact that Slowly was not able to be challenged. And he said, well, it depends on the culture that you develop. I allowed, past tense because he's retired, up to a certain level, and he actually said which levels down, we're able to say, I don't agree with you or whatever. So obviously you're not going to allow everyone in the meeting, I'm assuming, to come and challenge you, but to a certain extent, in my opinion, the power of being in charge is that you surround yourself with the most brilliant brains in each one of the different areas of which you may not know enough. And I think that Slowly failed in understanding that the power does not reside within you, but the knowledge of everybody else could have been incorporated to help everyone in this situation. Then the government of Canada trying to prove that the act was required in order to control the situation, because 10,000 officers would have been required without shrinking the footprint. I don't agree with that, because everybody else is saying, listen, we didn't need the act. Here, something interesting once again. Daily pressure from the federal government to resolve, and people did not want to be deployed to Ottawa. That's what Carson Party said. And sadly, the Council of the City of Ottawa didn't ask why. Of course, the answer to me is obvious. You don't want to go there because it's too cold, because I don't believe in attacking the convoy or whatever. But it would have been fantastic if she would have asked, and she didn't. So that was a little bit disappointing from my end. Here, interesting, from the convoy organizer counselor, the fact that in the final plan, there's no reference to the charter. So previous preliminary plans were talking about the charter, but not the last one. So I found that very interesting, because obviously, again, this is not a court of law, so we can't really send anyone to jail, particularly the crime minister, which is obviously what I'm assuming vast majority of people who are listening to me want to see. So that could have been useful, but obviously no consequences. The government of Saskatchewan and the government of Alberta, the councillors, and they again ratifying there was no need for the emergency act to be called. And then in the end, we have the OPP councillor trying to focus the conversation into what could be the lessons learned, so we can help the whole process. And then obviously the answer is, well, we should have an integrated command. It's difficult with strong personalities because everybody wants to remain control. But that was the big picture in terms of the learning. Now, in the end, obviously, we saw this yesterday. The lead commissioner asked him a little bit of try to explain the difference between when you speak about the protest and the occupation. You talk about this in an interchangeable manner. So can you kindly clarify that? And then he said in the conversation that they're the same. So it actually reminds me of the lawsuit of Depp versus Heard, on which pledge is the same as donate, which obviously they're not. So I disagree with him. I loved his testimony, but I don't agree with that answer. So that's why he's going to give it a little bit of a reduction in the score I give everyone every day. And again, second time the lead commissioner asks, there was an opportunity for the protesters to go somewhere else and continue in their protest, and the answer was no, because at that point all the negotiations had been closed, and prior to that some locations had been offered, but they were not really denied. Then in the end, once again, unprepared, the convoy counselor said, "Oh, may I please ask a question?" And obviously the lead commissioner said no, because if I give you an opportunity, everybody will, and then we're closing. So again, a little bit of not understanding the process, which doesn't look very well for the convoy counselor. My point of view, again, I really love the testimony of Craig Abrams. I give him an 11/10 only because I don't think I would have been able to control myself if somebody was attacking me the way this gentleman was attacking him on the stand. So I give him 11/10. He provides very precise information. His notes are very clear, comes across as credible, and sounds very logical. And I feel that his strategic input was not properly used. He was misused. Very powerful resource, in my humble opinion. I don't know enough, obviously, of all the in and outs of a police operation, but he comes across as extremely logical, which would have been useful. Carson Pardee, I'll give him 9.5 because he said that protest is the same as occupation, and he could have been a little bit, I would have preferred if he would have said, listen, I used that interchangeable, but the protest was declared officially an occupation on Monday, so it's not the same. But again, he was great. He ratified the poor communication between all the different parties, and also ratified multiple times that invoking the act wasn't required. So 9.5/10. Thank you very much for listening, and I will be back on Monday.